Sup you beautiful people. Hope you've had a fantastic day. Welcome back to another new episode of What If Naruto Was the Red X. If you guys enjoyed this what if, comment down below and let me know. And go ahead and check out other what ifs in the channel after watching this video. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a like, and also share this video with your friends. So now let's start this video. Shaking his head and growling darkly, the Jubie opened its 4 remaining eyes, and reached out to grasp Kid Flash with a deep scowl. However, before he could do so, Kid Wicked suddenly appeared and pulled the speedster into the shadows, the Jubie gritting its teeth as they escaped. However, it then grunted as a torrent of flames and magical energy then hit the side of its face. Opening an eye, the Jubie then narrowed it as it saw its attackers, Dr. Fate using his magic, Gizmo using a laser from his pack, Seymour using his eye beam, and Trigon using his demonic fire. Roaring out in fury, the Jubie sent one of its tails towards the group, only for Kid Wicked to pop up and rescue them yet again. "I am going to kill that annoying mortal," the beast thought to itself with a dark frown across its features. Moving both of its arms up, the Jubie placed them onto 2 of the still standing buildings, and lifted himself up off of the ground. Shaking his head for a moment, the enormous demonic beast then started looking around for its attackers, primarily Kid Wicked, so he could crush the annoying mortal, and so they would stop escaping from him. As it did, BP flew as a pterodactyl into the sky and towards the semi-blinded Jubie, as it claws at its own face, trying in vain to pull the tiny axe out of its enormous eye, and only serving to slice through its own face. On the opposite side of BP, Donnie is flying intangibly towards the Jubie as well, a grin clearly on her face under her mask. Roaring out in pain, the beast's tails thrashed about, the group below making sure to stay out of its flailing tail's way, while Slade jumped down to the ground, landing next to a surprised Ravager. "Father?" she questioned in surprise, and Slade looked to his daughter with his single, slate-gray eye for a moment. "For the record, I'm nobody's servant," he replied before looking back to where BP was flying around the numerous tails that were thrashing about, causing whirlwinds and earthquakes with each swing they made. Donnie was merely remaining intangible while approaching the other side of the Jubie's head. Soon both saw their target. BP quickly changed into an armadillo and fell towards the Jubie, while Donnie dive-bombed it. Flowing through the Jubie's skull, Donnie entered into its left ear, while BP changed into a raven at the last second, and flying into the creature's ear as it continued to thrash about. Flying around in its skull for a short while within the enormous beast's ear, BP soon came to the deepest portion of its ear and changed into a whale. Donnie soon reached the same spot in the Jubie's other ear, and took a deep breath of air. Landing within its head as a whale, BP then let out a loud groaning sound within the Jubie's inner ear. While on the other side, Donnie let loose with a banshee scream into the Jubie's opposite ear, ringing both eardrums violently. As the 2 sounds echoed within the Jubie's head, the enormous beast shrieked in pain once more, rearing back and falling down, back first into the ground. The Jubie slammed into the ground with a mighty slam, shaking the earth beneath it, while BP and Donnie both flew out of the Jubie's ear and into the sky once more. As the Jubie heard a loud ringing in its ears from the 2 sounds, it started to get up, only for 8 enormous snakes to rip their way out of the ground, then wrap around the beast. "What is this?" the Jubie demanded while gritting its teeth and shrieking when the familiar snake started to bite into its body. "Wait a minute. Is that Orchimaru?" Naruto wondered to himself while watching the false Yamada Narachi wrap its body around the Jubie. The first of its head then quickly bit into the side of its neck, the next 4 each twisted around and sunk their poison fangs into the Jubie's legs, 2 more of the snakes wrapping around its 10 tails before biting into one another. The tails of the snake then coiled their way around the Jubie, holding it down while its final head spit out Orchimaru. The Serpentine Man then shot up and grabbed hold of the Guardian's war axe, and ripped it out of the Jubie's eye, causing it to shriek in pain and thrash about in the grasp over the false Yamada Narachi that was wrapped over its form. Twisting in the air, Orchimaru fell towards the ground with axe in hand, and an amused smirk across his face. Seeing the ground approaching, Orchimaru merely twirled the war axe in hand before digging it into the building at his side. Hanging on as he slowed down, Orchimaru soon found himself on the ground and chuckled lightly while looking up towards the pained Jubie. "Alright, I'll leave the rest up to you, and your little friends, Naruto-kun. For the time being this should make for an excellent replacement for the Kusanagi." Orchimaru mused while focusing his chakra into the weapon, then smirked as its blade burst into flames. Within the city, watching on with wide eyes as the Jubie thrashed against the bonds of the false Sriracha, a sense of hope slowly started to well within her chest. "I don't believe it. They're actually doing it. They're hurting it." She whispered and then watched as a furious Jubie roared loudly, the sheer force of its roar, destroying the skin of the Yamada Narachi that Orchimaru had left to hold it down. Grunting lightly, the Jubie then got back to its feet, widening its eyes when it saw that it was bleeding heavily. Yes, they're hurting it. It's just so amazing, isn't it? The demon raven noted dryly while walking over to her human half with a frown on her face. Turning to her other self, the young raven looked away before hearing a loud caw in the distance. Both girls then looked up and saw White Raven flying overhead before dive-bombing. Blinking for a moment, the young raven yelped even as the bird impacted with her, creating a blinding light, her demonic half hissing while backing away. Soon the light faded away and in place of the young raven, was a full-grown raven, albeit in white rather than blue and black clothing. Blinking for a moment, the now older raven looked to her hands for a moment, then up towards the injured and panting Jubie. If there is all can help them overcome something like that, then shouldn't we fight with them? Raven asked her other self and the demoness scowled deeply. Give me one good reason I should work with a goody-goody like you. The red-skinned demoness demanded and Raven crossed her arms over her chest. Because if we don't work together, you have to go back to hell, when everything is said and done. Well, I get to stay out here. Raven reminded the demoness flatly, and she suddenly twitched at that tidbit before grumbling under her breath with a scowl. Sighing softly, the demoness then formed a ring of obsidian energy around her body, while glaring at the White Witch. Fine. But I'm only doing this for the fact I'll still be with Naruto in some way. If I had things my way, I'd gladly head back to hell with him, rather than be a part of you. The demoness declared angrily, and Raven managed a light smile while forming white energy into a ring around her own body. I think that's a good enough reason. She decided and walked into the demoness, a spiral of black and white energy suddenly shooting into the sky, as the two became one complete being again. This is impossible. Not even the Rakuto-san in himself could truly stop me. You worthless ninja shouldn't even be able to harm me like this. The Jubie snarled and Naruto smirked as Starfire and Blackfire landed, Cyborg and Mammoth grinning as they reared their arms back with the girls holding on to Naruto. Yeah, well, you're not the old Jubie. You're just a cheap knockoff, so shut up about how great you are already. Naruto grumbled out and sent towards the Jubie, a snarl forming on the beast's lips, while Cyborg and Mammoth grinned. Alright. Let him go, Mammoth. Cyborg cried out as he and Mammoth launched Starfire, Blackfire, and Naruto into the air, sending them flying faster than normal. Gritting its teeth, the Jubie sent its tails towards the two girls, only for them to dodge and weave around them, and then rear Naruto back, and quickly throw him straight towards the Jubie. Falling towards the Jubie, Naruto then smirked as the Jubie opened its mouth and lunged up at him. Grinning slightly, Naruto formed his 10 tails around his body into a ball as the Jubie snapped its jaws over him. However, a mere second later, the Jubie shrieked in pain and threw its head back, a ball of white fire flying into the sky. Twisting around, Naruto released the flames of Shiranui, and looked down to the beaten and battered Jubie, before moving all 10 of his tails forward. Jubie Imari. 10-tailed menacing bull. Naruto exclaimed as the energy formed at his mouth, only to be unleashed in a powerful wave, which then slammed into the Jubie, sending it careening into the ground, and burning more of its flesh from its body as well. Grinning to himself, Naruto flapped his tails once more, giving himself a burst of speed and flying down towards the Jubie. I won't lose. To the likes of you pathetic little ninja. The Jubie snarled, half the flesh burned away from its face as it looked up, and opened its mouth to form an Imari of its own. Not giving Naruto the time to put up a defense against it, the Jubie unleashed its Imari directly towards the falling Akami. However, a second before it would have impacted with the Akami, 5 obsidian black spheres quickly formed around him, each one inside the other, protecting him from the blast. Widening his eyes in shock, the Jubie then watched as the attack passed, blowing a hole clear out of the sky above. However, the spheres of dark energy then seemed to melt away, revealing a long-haired version of Raven. Her body looked like it was back to normal with the blue cloak and black clothing armor restored. However, her hair was onyx black, and gave off a violet sheen. Her skin was tanned, neither gray nor crimson, instead appearing to be lightly tanned. Her 2 eyes were blazing crimson red, and upon each hand, she had sharp black claws. Kara-chan. Naruto questioned and a smirk crossed the girl's lips, turning around to face the wolf for only a moment. Maybe you were expecting someone else. She quipped dryly and then yelped as Naruto pounced on her, then started to lick her face. Okay. I'm happy to see you as well. Down boy, heel. Raven ordered playfully while pushing the happy Akami off of herself, then looked towards the Jubie with a slight frown across her face. I think you've still got something to take care of. you've got a time limit, remember? Raven reminded the Akami, and it nodded its head, Raven forming a sphere of dark energy around him and twisting around, then roaring out, while throwing the blonde down towards the Jubie with all her might. Smiling slightly as he moved towards the climax of their story, Raven then flew down towards the rest of her friends, landing on the ground, and then raising a brow, as they all looked at her in shock. Raven. BB started to ask as he approached the girl with wide eyes. Is that really you? The green-furred titan questioned, and the girl frowned while crossing her arms and bringing her hood up to shadow her features. Does this answer your question? She asked in her usual stoic monotone, BB grinning widely when he heard her familiar voice. Raven. He exclaimed happily while latching onto the girl in a hug, soon followed by a jubilant Starfire. Oh friend, it is most joyous to have you return to us. Starfire exclaimed while picking Raven and BB up off the ground and twirling with them in her arms. Phasing out of their grasp, the Dark Titan then pulled her hood back and shook her head. It's nice to see you both as well, but let's not forget we still got to see the end of this. Raven reminded while looking to where Naruto was still falling towards the Jubie, however the beast roared out, lunging at the Akami and snapping its jaws over him. I runt. Jubie growled out angrily only to shriek out in pain and throw its head back, opening its mouth, while Naruto flew out spinning into the air. However, oddly enough, his entire body was coated with the white flames of Shiranui, briefly making him look like a pure white wolf. Twisting around for a moment, Naruto soon righted himself and looked down to where Jubie was spitting out blood, the white flames burning his mouth. Inwardly chuckling at the sight, Naruto then spun around while the Shiranui flames over his body quickly went out. Narrowing his eyes, Naruto propelled himself down towards the Jubie, only for Utagarasu to fly over him and land on his back when he got close to the beast. Raising a brow for a moment, Naruto then felt a strange yet warm presence suddenly appear in his body. Chikurakusari. Chakra chains. The Akami exclaimed as dozens of spiked chains ripped their way out of his back, then wrapped around the Jubie, causing it to snarl and thrash against them, as they dug their way into the ground, and pulled the enormous 10-tailed beast down to the ground. Landing on the ground with a soft plop, the Akami then looked to the struggling Jubie in shock. Wait a minute, those are Mom's chakra chains. The black-furred Akami thought to himself while gazing at the chains that had formed out of his back and wrapped around the enormous beast. Shaking his head afterwards, Naruto then grit his teeth as the Jubie lifted up a hand and started to pick himself up from the ground. Alright, I've got Mom's chains, but I'm just one. Wait a second. Naruto then thought and closed his eyes while focusing on molding his chakra. Inwardly focusing, the Akami then grit his teeth as a couple of copies seemed to form out of his back. The copies shook their heads for a moment before looking from Naruto to the Jubie, then ran towards it, spreading out as they did. Snarling deeply, the Jubie then reached out and tried to grab one of the copies, however it quickly moved out of the way before sliding to a halt and formed its own chakra chains, and they shot around the limb, and it started to back up. On the other side, another copy did the same thing, a third moving in front of Naruto taking over for him, while a fourth and fifth copy used their own chains to hold its legs down, trapping all but its tails, which the body of the fake Yamada Narachi managed to hold onto. Naruto then smirked as he also quickly returned to his human form, taking a breath and looking to Utagarasu on his shoulder. What is up with this bird? The blonde wondered to himself before turning back to glare at the Jubie as his Akami Bunshin, wolf clones, held it down for him. Crouching down for a moment, the blonde then lunged forward, Utagarasu flying from his shoulder as he did. Naruto quickly jumped up over a torrent of Kusuneabi from the Jubie, as it breathed it towards him upon his approach. Breathing lightly as the flames passed, Naruto then formed the Kusanagi into his hand, before calling upon the wind to launch himself higher into the air. Narrowing its eyes, the Jubie lifted one of its arms, barely, and reached out for the ex-shinobi. Narrowing his eyes, Naruto launched himself towards the hand and twisted around in mid-air, while extending the Kusanagi, slicing cleanly through the length of the beast's entire arm, and even one of its eyes as well. Widening its eyes, the Jubie screeched in excruciating pain, thrashing about in its bindings, while Naruto held out a hand towards it. Shinra Tensei. The blonde exclaimed while bringing down a mass of gravity down upon the Jubie, pressing it down into the ground, helping the Akami Bunshin to hold it. Coming down onto the Jubie's back with a smirk, Naruto then turned, swinging the Kusanagi and slashing and slicing through the Jubie's body. Turning the sword in hand soon after, Naruto then gripped the handle with both hands, and stabbed it down through the Jubie's spine, lengthening the blade, and causing it to stab straight through the beast's entire form. The Jubie's eyes widened as he did, and a pitiful sound escaped its lips as the blonde then pulled his sword from the beast's body. Looking at the massive cuts and lacerations he'd left on it for only a moment, Naruto then turned towards the beast's head while dismissing the kusanagi. Jumping up to it, Naruto landed with a soft plop and smirked darkly. Widening its remaining eyes as he did, the Jubie tried to see the blonde as he placed a hand onto it and frowned deeply. "You were right about one thing, Jubie," the blonde admitted while quickly gripping hold of something that lay inside of the Jubie and holding onto it as tightly as he could. "This is the end," he then declared while quickly jerking back on his arm, ripping out the familiar red chakra of the Kyubi from the beast. The Jubie cried out as he did so, its body turned to ash and began to flow away with the breeze, soon enough leaving only Trigon screaming in its place. Knelt down and in pain, the enormous demon then fell forward with Naruto standing on his head, his powers depleted, and his body completely spent from the ordeal of changing into the Jubie. Naruto on the other hand held out his hand and looked to the brilliant crimson like that was the Kyubi's soul and yin chakra. However, as he did, he felt his eyes widen before putting a hand to his head as a memory from the beast suddenly passed before his mind's eye. Twitching as the memories assaulted his mind, Naruto then grit his teeth and shook his head at them with a deep frown. Narrowing his eyes onto Kyubi's soul for a moment, the blonde then gripped it tightly, watching it as it seemed to squirm in his grip. "Don't worry, Kyubi, I won't be the one to ultimately kill you," Naruto thought to himself and then turned on his heel, and threw what remained of the Kyubi's chakra and its soul over to the side. The energy flew through the air before stopping in midair, creating a spiral of red energy as it did. Watching on silently, Naruto then narrowed his eyes as the beast reformed in the air, and then landed in a heap, and thus jumped off of Trigon's body, and landed on the ground with a light plop. Letting out a quick breath and brushing off his coat, Naruto then slowly made his way towards the downed Kyubi. Looking around as he continued to walk towards the downed Kyubi, the blonde then watched as the Akami Bunshin all reared their heads back and into the air, before suddenly howling into the sky. "I guess they're giving a victory howl of their own," the blonde-haired youth thought to himself while the Akami then retracted their chakra chains back into their bodies. Blinking for a moment at the strange sight, the blonde then smirked as the Akami Bunshin all dispelled themselves, leaving only a faint trail of smoke behind as they went. Soon coming to a halt, Naruto stood before the Kyubi and narrowed his eyes onto the beast, as it opened its own bloody crimson ones. "You just had to do it, didn't you?" Naruto questioned darkly, and the Kyubi narrowed its eyes onto him while trying to reach its right hand for him. "Worthless. Little runt," the Kyubi hissed out in pain while Naruto merely jumped onto its outstretched hand before it could do anything with it. "Me worthless? Who's the one laid out and completely exhausted around here, Kyubi?" Naruto quipped in reply while crossing his arms over his chest, the Kyubi narrowing its eyes onto him dangerously. "Or, perhaps I should call you by your true name instead," Naruto noted aloud and watched the Kyubi's bloody crimson eyes widen before narrowing onto him dangerously. "Be silent, runt. That weak little fool is long dead. I'm all that remains of her now," the Kyubi declared angrily, and Naruto tilted his head to one side, a look on his face that greatly annoyed the beast. "Yeah, I'm so sure you are," Naruto replied and then turned his back onto the beast before jumping back to the ground and landing in a crouch with a sigh. As he did, an evil grin crossed the Kyubi's face, its eyes showing a sort of mad glee as it did. "Walking away now? Surely you want revenge? To take my life for the things I've done? After all, I did manage to kill your wench of a mother once, as well as your bastard father," the Kyubi reminded darkly, Naruto twitching before clenching his fists at his sides, as he turned to glare at the grinning beast. However, just as he did, he suddenly came to a halt, eyes widening as a gong sounded out all around him. Feeling a shiver run up and down his spine, Naruto turned around, then watched on, as fog seemed to condense out of thin air. Shivering as the gong sounded yet again, the blonde-haired youth then watched as the earth split open, a long crack stopping just shy of him. Following the crack, Naruto watched as numerous Hidodama spilled out of it, rising up and floating into the air before hovering around silently, followed shortly by a single hand that reached up and out of the earth itself. Meanwhile, the Titans in Tartarus felt as if something had walked over their collective graves. A deep and what felt nearly unending feeling of fear and loss echoing out in the souls of each of them. Raven herself felt fear for what was now the second time in her life, the sheer depths of fear confirming what she believed to be coming. Trigon was only slightly less fearful than the humans, being essentially immortal helped, however even he felt some amount towards the thing that was coming, as the entire world around them was suddenly covered in a dense unending fog. "Dude. Like what's going on?" BB asked while shaking in his shoes, Nightwing slowly shaking his head while watching as something slowly rose out of the earth. The being's back was to the Titans, Tartarus, and JLU. However, its sheer size and the black energy seeming to flow off of its body gave them all a clear indication it was not something that was to be trifled with. Looking to Naruto, the Shinigami then threw its arms to the sides, an evil grin upon its face as it looked to the blonde darkly. "It is time," the death god declared, and Naruto took a quick breath of air and then stood up, grimacing slightly as his worn-out body protested to the action. Making his way towards the Shinigami, Naruto then fell to his knees and bowed before the beast, panting slightly while holding out his arms. "Shinigami-sama," Naruto whispered while looking up to the death god, the set being chuckling as it gazed from the battered form of Kyubi to Trigon. "I present to you, the dreaded Kyubi no Kitsune. It is yours to do with, as you wish," Naruto stated while Yutagarasu landed on his shoulder, as if to protect the blonde from the Shinigami. It then cawed loudly. Tilting its head for a moment while looking to the spiky-haired blonde, the Shinigami then looked over to the Kyubi, and then watched as Naruto gave him a look. "Our deal is done. Now you can take the Kyubi, and just go," Naruto stated, and the Shinigami's sneering grin seemed to widen as it floated away from the blonde. Silently, the being hovered towards the Kyubi, the multi-tailed beast's eyes widening at its approach. Groaning, the beast tried to pull itself away, only to grit its teeth, the loss of chakra from forming the Jubie, summoning the Yokai, and then having his soul forcibly ripped out of Trigon, disabling the majority of his motor functions. "At long last, the threat of the Biju shall finally be ended," the Shinigami declared while reaching up and pulling its dagger from its mouth. The Shinigami then threw its arm forward, digging it into the Kyubi, causing its eyes to widen in fear. No. The Kyubi somehow managed to get out in a hoarse whisper, before it was quickly dragged to the mouth of the Shinigami. "Your soul is mine," the Shinigami uttered darkly while easily pulling the body of the Kyubi back and opening its mouth. Shrieking aloud as the Shinigami then devoured it whole, the Kyubi struggled against the pull of the death god even as the Shinigami finally swallowed it, and then snapped its jaws close, sealing it away forever. And behind it, Naruto looked at the Shinigami in no small amount of fear, then watched as it turned back around and floated over to stand before him once more, slipping its dagger back within its teeth silently. "You have done well, young Akami. But be forewarned, this is not the end of your story, this is only just the beginning. You shall be of further use to us, in the future," the Shinigami warned ominously as it slowly turned into a mist before ultimately vanishing, the mist and fog slowly flowing into the crack they'd appeared from. Soon enough even the crack itself sealed shut, leaving Naruto to shiver before looking to where the Titans and Tartarus were running over to him from. "Dude, we did it," BB exclaimed happily, while Donnie flew over to stand at her sensei's side with a grin on under her mask. "Sensei, that was so awesome. Do you think you can teach me that wicked soul-ripping trick?" Donnie suddenly asked, and Naruto blinked before frowning towards the girl for a moment. "Unfortunately, I really don't think I can teach something like that. And even if I could, I really don't like using it myself," Naruto replied while Donnie pouted and crossed her arms, as the rest of Tartarus walked over to the blonde and congratulated him as well. "Ha! That'll teach that stupid thing and anyone else not to mess with Tartarus," Gizmo declared with a killer grin on his face, the rest of Tartarus agreeing with the tiny terror, while Jinx smiled towards Naruto. "Thanks for the gift. It really did come in handy," Jinx whispered to the blonde-haired teen, and he raised a brow before looking to the string of beads. Seeing that the beads were giving off a faint white glow, Naruto then blinked before smiling softly to his pink-haired friend. "No problem, Jinx," he offered with a grin on his face, then looked to the side, and saw that Nightwing was looking at him with a thin frown across his face. "So are you finally starting to run out of steam or what?" Nightwing questioned of the blonde-haired teen with a smirk forming across his face, and Naruto merely grinned towards the other teen in response. "Yeah, well, I'm too tired to come up with some witty retort right now. Give me a little time to at least catch my breath, kid," Naruto mumbled while Jinx then offered the tired blonde his shakuja back. Giving a grin to the rosette, Naruto reached out and took hold of the staff, then started to lean against it heavily. Breathing out for a moment, the blonde then grimaced when he saw Batman, Trigon, Dr. Fate, and Shair walking over to them. However, when he felt Raven hug him from the side, the blonde smiled and placed an arm over her shoulder, only to frown towards where the injured Trigon was. "However, I don't think we're really all done here yet," Naruto then said while watching as Trigon was slowly turned himself onto his hands and knees while panting heavily to himself, then slowly pushed himself up to glare at them. I think I'll handle this one, Raven stated while walking from the group and over towards her father, with a deep frown on her face. Grunting lightly, Trigon glared at the approaching form of his daughter, even as he bled from multiple wounds inflicted upon both him and Kyubi, when they were combined then separated. You think you are a threat to me, little girl? Even in my weakened state, I am still more powerful than you. Trigon growled at Raven as he slowly grit his teeth and lifted one of his hoofed feet up and dug it into the ground. I am your creator. Your master. You exist only to serve me. You survive only because I allow it. Trigon growled at Raven as she continued to approach, frowning deeply and forming a ring of black and white energy around her waist. What hope can a mere child like you have of defeating her all-powerful father? Trigon demanded, and Raven narrowed her eyes onto the enormous demon dangerously. You may have created me, but you were never my father, Raven declared while firing twin beams of energy at Trigon, one black and one white. The beams connected with Trigon's chest, knocking him back where he was forced to brace himself against a building before watching as Raven continued to approach him. Wretched insignificance, Trigon started to say, only to cry out as Raven fired another stream of energy into his chest, knocking him back and through the building completely, crushing it under his weight. Fathers are kind, Raven stated while walking forward and firing another beam into Trigon, sending him skidding to the side where he slowly got up on one knee. Fathers protect you, she added while firing again, Trigon rolling back and into a building before glaring at the violet-haired girl. Fathers raise you, Raven added while firing once more, black and white lightning swirling over Trigon and causing him to bow before the girl. Taking a deep breath, Raven then closed her eyes and called upon the power she'd left with her friends. Nightwing, Cyborg, Starfire, and Beast Boy all looked to one another as they felt a pull and held up a hand, a trail of familiar ebony energy flowing from their hands and over towards Raven. Holding up her own hand, Raven quickly absorbed the power into herself before glaring at Trigon fiercely. I was protected by the monks of Azarath. I was raised by my friends, Raven exclaimed while glaring at Trigon, the enormous demon managing to gaze at the girl with one eye. They're my family, this is my home, and you are not welcome here, Raven exclaimed while flying into the sky and throwing her arms to her sides. Seeing this, Naruto closed his eyes and vanished in a swirl of white flames, only to reappear and wrap his arms around Raven from behind, Shikujo still in hand. Blinking in shock, Raven turned to see Naruto over her shoulder, and the blonde grinned towards her. Mind if I help you out here, Kar-chan? The blonde-haired teen questioned of the girl, and a small smile worked its way across her face. Moving her arms up to form an X over her torso to hold onto his arms, she then turned her eyes back to Trigon. Not at all, she whispered in reply before closing her eyes, Naruto closing his own as they mixed their powers together. Azarath, Metrian, Zinthos. Both Naruto and Raven exclaimed as their combined powers suddenly burst forth, forming a pillar of black and white energy that reached into the heavens. Spotting this, Yutagarasu caught for a moment before flying towards the pillar and entering into it as well. Soon enough a pair of wings burst from the pillar, looking a great deal like those of Raven's soul self. Soon enough, however, a pair of familiar purple-gray eyes opened up from within the power, causing all of the energy to explode outwards across the world. Trigon was hit by the wave first, holding up his arms only to scream as his body was simultaneously burned and ripped apart. Soon enough all that was left of Trigon was his dying scream, and the power then stretched outward, forming into a white field that spread outwards in a circle, undoing the damage done by both the Jubie and Trigon. The Titans, Tartarus, and JLU watched on in silence, as the wave of energy approached and then flowed over them as well. The energy then stretched out, farther and farther, crossing over the entire planet, and righting what Trigon had done. Meanwhile, Naruto had what sounded like wings flapping, from what he could only assume was Yutagarasu. Slowly his eyes fluttered open to an endless blue sky, the sun shining overhead brightly. Blinking for a moment, Naruto found himself spread out, arms outstretched to either side, his Shikujo in his right hand. Looking around from this position, Naruto raised a brow when he saw mountain peaks were completely encircling him on the horizon. He also noticed that, oddly enough, he seemed to be laying on nothing but a cloud, yet he wasn't falling through it, as he should have. What the hell? The blonde questioned and then used the Shikoju to pull himself up and gripped it with both hands. Where am I? The blonde questioned once more and heard Yutagarasu call. Looking up, he spotted the three-legged raven was flying overhead before slowly lowering itself. Turning around to see where it was going, Naruto found a body connecting with his and a pair of arms wrapping around him. Blinking in surprise for a moment, Naruto then widened them, when he saw a familiar shock of crimson hair. I miss you, Sachi-san. A woman whispered, and Naruto widened his eyes before closing them and wrapping his arms around her as well. I miss you too, Akasan, Mom. The blonde replied quietly while smiling faintly as he even recognized her smell from so long ago. She still smells just like a warm sunny summer day. The blonde thought to himself absently before taking a breath and pushing back, stepping out of her arms and seeing a tearful smile on her face. But, how are you here? Naruto asked, and Kushina looked to her left shoulder, Utagarasu landing and rubbing the side of its head into her cheek. My little friend here arranged it. Kushina admitted while petting Utagarasu, and Naruto noted how odd it was that the bird was acting that way. So what, is it your pet or what, and how can a bird bring us here anyways? Naruto questioned of the woman, and Kushina blinked before looking to Utagarasu, then to Naruto with a grin. Yeah, you could say he's my pet. And as for how we got here, he's a summoned spirit, which allows him to bring you to his domain, and all Karasu are tied to death as spirit warders, thus allowing him to bring me here as well. Kushina replied in explanation while reaching up to rub the neck of Utagarasu once more, the raven cawing lightly as she did. And the little known fact, that I held the Karasu summoning contract, when I was alive also helps. Kushina added with a grin on her face, and Naruto blinked before rolling his eyes and looked all around. Where are we anyways? Naruto questioned of the woman, and she made a sound for a moment while crossing her arms. On the border of life and death, in the realm where spirits dwell. Or just the spirit realm if that helps. She replied with a smile on her face, and Naruto blinked, then sighed while leaning into the Shikujo. Boy. And to think I was actually trying to get here when I first escaped Konoha. Naruto said to himself, and Kushina snickered into one hand before grinning towards her son for a moment. You're as bad at that jutsu as I am, Sachi. I remember back when I first learned it from the Karasu when I was younger, I actually ended up a couple 100 feet in the air instead of the spirit realm. Sarutobi and Minato only just managed to catch me before I went splat, and then they put it into the sacred scroll as an S-rank ninjutsu, because of how dangerous it was, that being. She stated with a wide and very familiar grin over her face, and Naruto gave her a look. At least I managed to break into another dimension. What's your excuse? Naruto demanded of the red-haired woman, and she twitched while glaring at her son for the crack, only for both to suddenly burst out into laughter. Man, I sure did miss having you around, Akasan. Naruto said with a true smile on his face, and Kushina nodded her head before breathing out. Yeah. But you shouldn't, Sachi. I do take the time to check up on you from time to time, one of the few things I enjoy where I'm at actually. Kushina stated, and Naruto gave her a look, smirking slightly as he did. Yeah, I know, give you some privacy, when you're with your girlfriend, right? Kushina stated as she knew what that look meant, then crossed her arms and shook her head. Teens, they all think they don't need their mothers anymore. It's so disrespectful. Kushina said half seriously, smirking the entire time, causing Naruto to roll his eyes and then shake his head. Well, look at it this way, Akasan. At least I don't have your annoying verbal tick anymore. Naruto noted with a smirk on his face, and Kushina blinked for a moment before grinning widely. Oh yeah. Ha. Take that, Sarutobi. I told you Sachi wouldn't get it from me. You and your damn seal caused it, Tbane. Kushina stated while pointing into the sky, and Naruto laughed to himself, holding his ribs while Kushina blinked and then blushed. Never mind. She then said while Utagarasu made a slight chirping laugh as well, the woman pouting towards it. You little traitor. She said with a pout, and yet Utagarasu still didn't cease with its laughter. However, Kushina then let out a sigh and looked to the smiling Naruto with a sad look. Well, looks like it's time for me to go, Sachi. She stated, and Naruto stopped his grinning and looked to the woman silently. Sighing, he then leaned into his shikujo and closed his eyes before opening one eye with a sad smile on his face. Of all the things I've wanted over the years, the thing I wanted most was just to be able to see you again. And now that I have, well, I kind of wish you could stay and maybe meet Kar-chan. Naruto replied while rubbing the back of his neck, and Kushina blinked for a moment and then smiled as well. Oh yeah, her. Speaking of your girlfriend, good work on finding her, Sachi. Even if you did disobey me when you did. Kushina said with a nod, and Naruto raised a brow while looking to his mother strangely. Huffing and crossing her arms, Kushina then gave the blonde-haired youth a look. Don't you remember, Sachi? Back when you were little, I told you to find a girl like me who wasn't weird, yet somehow you find one who's practically my exact opposite. Kushina reminded, and Naruto blinked for a moment before giving the woman an annoyed look. So? He asked with a slight growl, and Kushina smirked in response. So what? It's your life, Sachi. Besides, she seems like a good match for your reckless, impulsive self. Sort of like Minato was for me. Kushina replied, and Naruto shrugged his shoulders, not wanting to think about that. However, he then yelled as his red-haired mother suddenly grabbed him around his neck with one arm, and gave him an annoyed look. But if you ever disobey me like that again, I swear that I'll pound you into the ground, Tbane. Kushina declared with her eyes narrowed, and Naruto gasped while gripping the arm around his neck. Alright. I get it, Mom. Just, please let me go. Naruto shouted, and Kushina nodded her head with a smirk while releasing the blonde, causing him to breath in then exhale, before giving the woman an annoyed glare. Geez, Shikamaru was right. Moms really are scary. Naruto thought to himself while Kushina looked around, and a slight sad smile crossed her features as she looked back to him. Anyways, Sachi, sorry to say it, but it looks like I can't stay here any longer. My time's up. I have to go back now. Kushina then stated, and Naruto blinked before a sad frown crossed his face. To Yomi? Naruto asked with a noticeable trace of fear in his voice, not wishing the fate of those poor souls on his mother, and yet Kushina smirked towards the blonde, as a white mist started flowing around her. No. And before you ask, let's just say I have my ways of staying out of that place. Oh, and before I forget, happy birthday, Sachi. Kushina replied softly, causing Naruto to raise a brow as he could almost swear he saw what looked like several red-orange markings appear over Kushina's face. However, before he could check again, the world blacked out, a soft voice echoing in his ears. Jump City. The world has been saved, all traces of Trigon and Kyubi's invasion takeover banished from existence. Much like it had been earlier, the sun was shining warming rays down upon the city. Birds flew through the sky, chirping happily as they did. The bay shined as the light caused sparkles to dance across its surface, and the wind gently shakes the trees of Jump City Park, causing them to lightly bend. Also, like it was earlier, the people of Jump City are once again going about their business, walking to and fro to reach their destinations, all save for a familiar group at Jump City Harbor. Dude, it is like such a beautiful day. BB stated with a nod of his head, breathing in a breath of fresh air as he did so, only for Starfire to grab him in a hug. Oh, I do so agree, my friend. It is indeed a most joyous day to be alive. She exclaimed while floating off the ground, and BB gasped as he started to turn blue. Saint Starfire. Air. He gasped out, and Starfire blinked before releasing her friend, while Cyborg slapped his face, and Dwayla fell over laughing. Oh god, that is just so fucking hilarious. Dwayla exclaimed before falling into yet another fit of laughter, Tartarus sighing as she did so. Meanwhile, only to the side were Jinx and Raven, both hovering over an unconscious Naruto. Oddly, Raven looked like she was back to normal, for her, having her old gray skin pigmentation, violet hair and eyes, and her nails teeth were also back to normal. Though this somehow annoyed her, mostly because in that form, at least she looked normal enough to blend in with the crowd, and therefore, she could go out with Naruto without drawing attention to herself. Naruto, wake up. Raven stated while shaking her blonde boyfriend lightly, while Jinx hovered over the unconscious blonde nearby. The city was also back to normal, confused people looking around in wonder, trying to figure out what had just happened to them and their fair city. However, Naruto himself seemed to be unconscious, eyes closed and limbs spread out as he lay on his back. Also around the area, the other Titans were surprised that the world was completely back to normal, as if none of the damage Trigon had caused was real. The JLU were contacting the others on the watchtower to confirm that everything was indeed alright. And finally, several members of Tartarus were passed out from exhaustion, Kid Wicked sleeping on the sidewalk soundly after a long day's work. Of the members still conscious, Gizmo, Donnie, Dwayla, Blackfire, Jinx, and Billy Numerous seemed to be the only ones. Tempest, please don't be dead. Jinx started to say to the unconscious blonde when Naruto suddenly sat up and blinked his eyes open. Looking around for a moment, the blonde then groaned while rubbing his head with a visible grimace on his face. Boy, Akasan hasn't changed one bit. She's still a little on a weird side of things. The blonde-haired teen grumbled with a true smile on his face, while Jinx and Raven latched onto him. Okay. I think I could get used to this. The blonde mused aloud with a smirk on his face, only to blink when he heard someone clearing his throat. Frowning as he did, Naruto then looked to both Jinx and Raven, the girls blinking then glaring at one another as they let him go. Shaking his head for a moment, the blonde then used his Shikujo to lift himself up to his feet. Need something, kid? Naruto asked the spiky-haired youth, but before Knight could comment, BB sprung forward with a grin. Dude. We did it. We saved the world. BB exclaimed happily, his arms raised into the air with a grin on his face, and Cyborg chuckled to himself. "Aw yeah baby. Let's say we head back to the tower, I'm making some waffles, and then we're gonna go out and party all night long." Sai stated with a nod of his head as if that was that, Starfire giggling to herself while Blackfire rolled her eyes. "It was most joyous to do battle by your side, beloved sister. I would very much enjoy to do so again in the future," Starfire stated while hugging Blackfire tightly, the older girl twitching slightly as she noticed the difference in their height again. "Coriander, let me go," Blackfire growled out, and Starfire blinked before chuckling nervously as she released the dark-haired girl. "We survived the end of the world, Billy, don't that just beat all?" Billy Numerous exclaimed while grinning to one of his clones, and it grinned back at him. "Yeah Billy, I bet Mandy LL have kittens when she hears we helped beat up an enormous demon," the clone added, and Billy nodded his head in agreement with his clone, while Dwayla snickered into her hand next to Donnie. "He's such an idiot," Donnie mumbled to herself while shaking her head, and Dwayla slipped an arm over her shoulder. Nearby, Kid Wicket opened one eye, and rubbed his face. Upon seeing the rest of the team were resting on the ground, either unconscious or asleep, Kid discreetly began to slip into his cloak, grab them, and then teleport them back to base, while none of the heroes were looking. "Hey, at least he doesn't have an enormously bulbous nose anymore," Dwayla offered in reply to the girl's comment, and Donnie raised a brow while Billy grimaced to himself with his clones. "Anymore?" the Gosling girl questioned with a raised brow and a visible smirk on her lips, only for Billy to quickly rush over and slap his hand over Dwayla's mouth to prevent her from saying any more. "It's a long story, little miss, but let's just leave it at that for now," Billy said quickly before dragging Dwayla away, the insane clown girl snickering to herself as he did so. "Hey folks. Nice to see y'all again, hope the wait for this chapter didn't kill ya," the girl then exclaimed inwardly towards the audience, as per usual with the insane teenager. Shaking his head at the insanity starting to break out around him, Nightwing then pinched the bridge of his nose with a frown. "Honestly X, how in the hell do you put up with these guys? Especially Dwayla?" Night questioned with a shake of his head, and Naruto merely shrugged his shoulders in response, an amused look on his face. "Honestly kid, I'm not so sure myself," the blonde-haired teen replied truthfully, and Jinx snorted before snickering into her hand, Raven rolling her eyes. As that was happening, BB was listening in on the conversation when he saw Kitten walking down the street and quickly slipped away from his friends. Sneaking up behind the girl, the green teen grinned as he prepared to surprise her, only to blink as she turned to face him with a smirk on her lips. "Dude. No fair, how come you always know it's me?" BB muttered with a pout, and Kitten giggled into one of her hands. "I'm just good at that kind of thing, beastie, so what are you guys doing out here?" Kitten questioned while seeing the Titans, and then widened her eyes when she saw Batman. "Oh crap. He's here," she mumbled to herself with wide eyes, not turning away from the Dark Knight, and BB nodded his head with a sigh. "Yeah, the Titans, JLU, and even some bad guys just work together to save the world," BB explained, and Kitten blinked her eyes, then shook her head and gave her boyfriend a look. "Seriously? Bad guys actually helped you in the JLU this time?" she questioned with a raised brow towards her boyfriend, and Beast Boy quickly nodded his head. "Yeah I know, right? It was so wicked dude. Raven's dad is this big bad demon named Trigon the Terrible, see, so she..." BB started to explain while Kitten listened to her boyfriend with clear interest on her face. Nearby, Cyborg was watching with a raised brow, easily able to recognize the blonde girl before picturing her with pink hair, thus causing a smirk to cross his lips. Starfire however was twitching as she hovered beside of the titanium teen, glaring at Kitten angrily as she did. "Please friend Cyborg, why is friend Beast Boy speaking with her?" Starfire asked with a slight growl, Blackfire raising a brow with an amused smirk at the animosity in the younger Tamaranian's voice. "You mean to say you can't recognize her?" Sai asked with a grin, and Starfire gave the titanium teen a look. "No, I recognize the kitten, but I mean why is she speaking with friend Beast Boy?" Starfire replied, and Cyborg snickered to himself, confusing the red-haired alien princess greatly. "Imagine her with pink hair." Sai then stated with another snicker, Starfire doing as told and then widening her eyes. Staring at BB and Kitten for a moment, she then grabbed Cyborg by the front of his armor and looked him in the eyes. "This is unacceptable. The kitten is a mean and cruel girl. We cannot allow this to continue, I must." Starfire started to say, only for Cyborg to grab her and place a hand over her mouth, as she started to spew curses in Tamaranian. "I see that little Starfire needs to learn how to let her grudges go." Blackfire noted with a smirk, and the set red-haired girl suddenly glared at her sister, clearly trying to remind her of her own grudges that she never let go. Hey, I've changed. Blackfire stated while crossing her arms over her chest with a frown, Starfire still muttering curses, while an amused Cyborg held her back. Well, personally I'm glad BB's with someone, even if it is her. She's already done her time for that prom stunt, so it's perfectly legal. And besides that, she seems to make BB a whole lot smarter than he normally is, so I'm all for that. Cyborg stated, Blackfire rolling her eyes while an angry Starfire simmered, amusing the dark-haired alien princess greatly. So this kitten annoys little Starfire in the same way X annoys Nightwing. This could be most amusing in the future. The dark-haired alien thought to herself, smirking while Kid Flash sat next to Donna, and both looked confused. Any idea why she seems to hate that kitten girl so much? KF asked his friend, and Donna shook her head while cracking her neck, and wishing it wasn't so much trouble to fight hordes of demons. Meanwhile, Naruto and Nightwing were staring at one another, a frown on the dark-haired teen's face. Oi kid, would you stop with the staring already? It's just starting to creep me out now. Naruto grumbled aloud, and Nightwing crossed his arms over his chest with a deep frown. Give me one good reason I shouldn't throw you in jail, throw the key into a black hole, and then never think of you again, for all the hell you've put me through. Nightwing replied, and a flat expression crossed Naruto's face as he gave the teen an annoyed look. It's my birthday for one thing. Naruto started, and Nightwing blinked for a moment, and then frowned deeply. I just helped save the entire world, and quite possibly the entire universe, from an enormous demon bent on the utter and complete eradication of immortals. Naruto then added, and Knight shrugged his shoulders as if that happened every other week, and with their world, that was a distinct possibility. And finally, I've not only helped stop Poison Ivy and Harley, I also helped you guys with that plant invasion, saved both Billy and Blackfire's lives, took down that asshole Orchimaru. Naruto started to lisp before a thought came to mind, and he quickly looked around. Thanks for listening. I do hope you enjoyed it. If you want the next part of this video, like, subscribe and comment down below and turn on the bell notification, and also check out other videos that I have created and enjoy. See you in the next video. Peace.